Welcome back to the Menopause Movement podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Gordon. If you're watching the replay or on YouTube, thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement. Today, we welcome Jerry Potter to the podcast. Now, we're continuing in our series on business training that started with Colleen Kohanic and James Wedmore. Jerry is the founder of 5 Minute Social Media, where he's been able to empower over 400,000 people around the world to do their own social media marketing. Jerry helps time-strapped entrepreneurs who are frustrated with social media simplify their processes. Jerry has a proven process that helps businesses use social media efficiently and effectively. Jerry helps new and stuck businesses grow using the world's simplest social media strategies, and he's going to share some of them with us today. Jerry lives in Seattle, where he spends his time with his wife and 2 tiny humans, and is on a quest to prove Diet Coke is actually good for him. And we talked about that before the podcast, and I told him it would never be good for him, but it's all right. Now, if you're a new or established entrepreneur or looking to branch out of a job you're not in love with, this episode will help you to demystify the basics of social media to get started. During the podcast, we discuss how Jerry got into social media, the importance of celebrating every small win, the comparison pitfall, how no one in business has time to do non-revenue generating activities, the importance of finding out what works for you, how simplifying is the path to success, knowing your goals, what are Instagram stories and how to use them and why they're so engaging, what to do if you're just starting out, dealing with mistakes. Now, stay to the end to find out Jerry's hardest and most compelling social media lesson and what you can do to avoid falling into the same trap. At the end of the episode, make sure you visit drmichellegordon.com/podcasts, where you can find the show notes plus the links to the books and resources mentioned in the episode. And if you enjoy the episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you're always the first to know when each episode is released. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you for all the 5-star reviews. If you haven't left a review yet, please take the time to review the podcast. This helps more women to find it and get the help they need during the disruption of menopause. No one should have to go it alone. If you feel so inclined, go ahead and open a conversation with me on Instagram at Dr. Michelle Gordon. Now let's get to Jerry. Thanks so much for being a part of the menopause movement. Jerry, welcome to the Menopause Movement podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so you help entrepreneurs, right? You help people do their social media. So how'd you get into that?
Well, I was actually a radio host or presenter or personality, whatever term you want to use, for over 20 years. And it was a very unlikely career for a lifelong introvert, but it was a lot of fun. And it's also a very transient business where you kind of have to move to keep advancing your career, contracts end, things of that nature. And it got to the point where family became a bigger priority. We didn't, drag the family around. And looking at everything that was happening in the world, I was trying to figure out, what else can I do? And a friend of mine said, you realize that you've been a content creator and an engagement specialist your whole career, right? Everybody needs that now. And it was this light bulb moment. And so that moment, I kind of went, well, the last 8 years in radio was 50% social media anyway. And so I kind of pursued this. I started a YouTube channel completely as a hobby called 5 Minute Social Media. It was put together after my young boys were in bed at night and just for fun, and it took off, and I realized that there was a need, and now I am out to impact as many people as I can to simplify this, to help people understand the amazing opportunity that there is to reach people and engage with people and communicate with people that we didn't have even 10 years ago. Even though Facebook existed 10 years ago, this opportunity was not there the way that it is now.
So when did you start 5 Minute Social Media? What year?
2017.
Okay. And so you've got a pretty big YouTube channel now?
Yeah, we recently passed, I think we're at about 85,000 subscribers. Like I said, it was not ever the expectation. When I started, I said, if I can get 50 people to show up and watch what I'm talking about every week, like, because you imagine those people in a room, if people showed up in a room to watch you speak every week, 50 of them, you'd be like, wow, this is amazing.
Right.
So I'm completely grateful and humbled, and it obviously showed the need that was there for people.
So I think that's a really good perspective to look at when you say, if you can get 50 people to look at something, podcasting, as you probably know, is a really long game. This podcast is over a year old, and, we've just surpassed like 26,000 downloads or something, and it's really slow. But you think about it, if every month we're getting 3,000 unique downloads, 3,000 to 5, and it grows every month. And so, to look at the subscribers, every single week, we're actually in the ears of at least, 600, 700 people. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Imagine those people in an auditorium every week. You'd be elated. You'd be like, wow, look at all of these people.
Yeah.
And sometimes we forget that. And I think it's really important to remember that, whether it's a podcast or YouTube or any social media following, an audience, if they're ready to listen to what you have to say, then you are impacting them, and you can't compare yourself to the people that are, ahead of you, because they're at one point too.
Right. Yeah, that's true. There is that problem with comparisonitis, right? When we first get started, we want to have instant results, and success looks a lot like hard work, right?
Yeah. It's a great quote.
That's Ashton Kutcher, but it's not luck. Taking those small actions that continually bring you closer and closer to your goals. That's how success happens. And then recognizing when things aren't working and making adjustments, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's really important to celebrate each little milestone that you hit as well.
Right.
One of the things that I'm always trying to remind myself of is, whoever you look up to, whether it's a doctor or an athlete or whatever it might be, once upon a time, they were picking up a bat for the first time and didn't know how to do it. And once upon a time, they probably, failed a quiz in med school or whatever it is. And so every milestone, I have a group coaching program, and inside I go out of my way to make sure people celebrate those wins, no matter how big or small, because it's so healthy for you to reflect and go, okay, well, man, I'm having a bad day now, but look at where I was 90 days ago or 6 months ago. And it makes such an impact on your mindset to do that, no matter how small the little win was.
That's really big thing. We talk a lot here at the Menopause Movement about, who we want to be, and kind of moving into that person, of becoming that person to get the results we want, and really looking at, how our thoughts shape our reality. That's what we do in the Menno system and in the coaching programs and things like that. And so it's very similar. So how specifically can, anybody who is looking to start a business, what can they do to kind of get going with social so it's not overwhelming?
I'll tell you, the first step is just kind of looking at what you're going to do on social media. And what a lot of people look at before they even get there is they look at other businesses. You look at somebody that's, speaking of somebody who's further ahead in your field, your business, whatever you want to be doing. And you look at what they're doing and you just go, oh my gosh, I can't do all that. Look at this. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're chatting with people here. They're doing all, they've got a YouTube channel, they've got a podcast. How could I ever start with that? And then the next step is people dive into social media, and then they try to do those things or even half of it, and they get overwhelmed and we quit, right? Because it gets hard. One of my favorite quotes, and I think it was Rachel Hollis that said this, is that, if entrepreneurship was easy, everybody would do it. She's the one that I heard say that. But it's worth the cost. It's the cost of admission for the great life that entrepreneurship allows us. And so when people get into social media, they do what they see others doing. They start posting, and they don't see the results, and they get discouraged, and they say, I just don't have time for this, or I don't have time to do this well. But the thing that I like to remind people of is you don't have time to do anything in your business that doesn't help you make money.
Right.
And that's what happens a lot, is there's this guilt that, I have to be on social media. We're in the day and age, the digital age. I have to be on social media. Somebody told me I had to be on social media. And so, yes, if you're doing social media and it's not leading to revenue, they know you don't have time, in the same sense that you don't have time to stand on the side of the street with a cardboard sign, advertising your business either, because it's not making you any money. And so that's the first thing I think is really, really important. The next step, though, is giving yourself grace to know that you don't have to do all the things. You don't have to do what you see your competitors doing. It's about figuring out exactly what will work for you and your business, and then focusing all in on that. Because if you try and do everything, nothing will do well.
So how does somebody find out what works for them?
It's a great question. And that's probably the number one thing that I work with people on. But what I like to have people do is you really need to start off and you need to set a proper social media goal or social media goals. And a lot of times, I'll ask, hey, what's your social media goal? And somebody will say, oh, well, I'm going to post 3 times a week. And posting 3 times a week is a to-do list. It's not a social media goal. It's different than business goals. They're different than marketing goals. Sometimes we'll say, well, I want to increase my followers. I want to grow my audience. But having a bigger audience has never been a guarantee that you'll actually generate revenue from it. So we don't want any of those to be our social media goals. There are numerous case studies of, influencers on Instagram with 2 million followers, and then they try and sell something and can't. Nobody buys. Right. So that follower number is irrelevant. I would much rather have 200 engaged people that wanted what I have than 10,000 people who, didn't, obviously. So
let's talk about that for 1 second about engagement. Yeah. I think because of COVID, it's really changed the landscape. People are home, and so people are looking for more connection online. And, that's where a lot of people who are in the online space are seeing record launches, record revenue. But if you look at your own buying behavior, and this is for anybody who is looking to start a business, when you start paying attention to your own buying behavior, it's like, how often do you buy something from somebody that you don't know, like, and trust, right? So if you don't have a relationship, if you're not able to establish some sort of relationship with the person who is your target, you're never going to be able to sell them anything. I don't know if that's what you teach, if you're in on that, but that's kind of, my own feeling. And that's why we give away so much. That's why we have the podcast. And besides that, with the free content, we can reach so many more, women and help them.
Yeah, without question. And that know, like, and trust is essential. And that might be, one of your social media goals. So when you're trying to figure out what a social media goal is for your business, and most businesses will have 2 to 3, what is the thing that is going to actually make somebody hire you or buy from you? Something happens before they do. And so it might be, your social media goal might be to get somebody on your email list or grow your email list, because that for every 10 people who join your email list, 1 becomes a paying customer or client. It might be to build and maintain relationships. If you're in a relationship business or a referral business, then your social media goal might be that. But you really want something that definitely leads to revenue in your business, as opposed to posting 3 times a week, increasing followers, which, don't make that difference. And so that's a big part of it. Now, when you talk about know, like, and trust, your social media goal, one of them could be to build that authority and that trust, so you do live videos or whatever it might be. But it really is different for everybody. And my favorite social media goal story, several years ago, I was speaking at a conference for charity or benefit auctioneers in Mexico. So it's a room full of auctioneers, and this guy comes up afterwards and he goes, hey, I want to tell you my social media goal. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I would love to hear it. What is it? And he says, it's to look busy. And I said, what do you mean to look busy? He goes, I have realized that when people assume that I'm busy, they assume that I'm good at what I do, and I keep getting hired. And so for him, who, he works maybe 50 events a year, that's, and the rest is just planning and consulting and things like that. So every time he has a meeting, he posts a picture. Every time he tries on a new, rental tuxedo or a costume or shops for a new bow tie or whatever it is, he posts pictures. And people say all the time, like, wow, you must be doing really well. And another thing of charity auctioneering is the majority of the events are in the spring and the fall. So he's got this lull in the summer and the winter where he's not even doing these events. And so, it works for him. People assume he's busy. They assume he's good. And he's been booked out for years because of that. And that's all he does. That's his social media goal, is to appear busy. And he's good at what he does. You can't pull this off. You can't just look busy and be terrible at what you do. You still have to, be good at it. But
right. But the thing is, he was able to know his audience enough to know that that was a goal that spoke to them. And that's important, right?
And it was simple, and that for him, and that was that's what I'm always looking for, is, figure out what's the simplest thing that you can do. And again, he's booked out every Saturday, that there were events in the spring and fall every year. And so he's happy with that. He could spend time on a lot of other things, but on social media, but that's what works. And that's all he has to do.
So you said simplify. And so I think that's important to talk about. And I'd love to get your process around that, because for a lot of us, social media is just daunting. It's like, I don't want to create this content. I don't want to post, I don't know how to get direct responses, and this Facebook group is just a big chain around my neck.
Yeah.
So what do you say to somebody who's, feeling those kinds of things?
The cornerstone of all of it is to figure out those goals to start. because then at least you know that the work you're putting in is leading toward revenue, because that's what you want it for, especially if you're somebody who's like, oh, I guess I got to be on social media. Here we are and entering the third decade of this millennium, and it's been around for like, I have to be, like you said, the Facebook group, that's the heavy chain around your neck. I got to do this. So what you want to do is you want to figure out what those goals are, and there may be a few. And then what we do is then, this is somewhat counterintuitive, but we build the plan backward from that goal so that we're only focusing on the things that matter. And what a lot of business owners do is they build forward. And so the typical, social media strategy that I'll see a lot of the times, and that I did once upon a time, was, okay, we're setting up this new business on social media. So let's set up their Facebook page, their Instagram account, their Twitter, their LinkedIn. Let's make sure they have, a Tumblr, all of the things, right?
MySpace.
And then, and then we start posting. So step 1 is set up all the networks. Step 2 is start posting. And then step 3 is wait for money. And that's what a lot of people are doing. They're like, I post, I do the things that all of the people say, and I nobody's buying. And so what we want to do is we want to work backwards. So we start at the end with those things that people, that will get somebody to buy. And so if you are in a know, like, and trust business, the thing that happens right before somebody buys might be that you have a one-on-one conversation with them, not in person, but just even a few messenger exchanges. Like, this is the way I grow a lot of my businesses. If I get somebody into a one-on-one conversation about their business and their challenges, I can, often show them that, hey, my course could really help you, or my membership, or whatever it might be, or this training I've got, or even a free training I've got somewhere. But I know that works. And so if that's true for your business, that if you get somebody into a one-on-one conversation, you say, okay, well, what happens before that? It's not I start just spam messaging people, because that's not going to work. But you start by posting engaging content that would get people to sort of self-identify as your ideal customer. And so let's just use Instagram as an example, because it's probably the best example of this. If I was focusing entirely on Instagram, I'm going to build my business on Instagram, and I need people in one-on-one conversations with me, I would post Instagram stories every day, and I would constantly ask for replies to things. And the great thing on Instagram stories is when somebody replies, it's a private message. So we start at the end, which is revenue. Right before that, we get into a one-on-one conversation. Right before that, we post a piece of content that leads to a one-on-one conversation. And so then that becomes, the beginning of the strategies. I'm just going to post things that lead to responses. And in that example, they don't even have to be about your business. I mean, you could put something up and say, here's a picture of my dog. What kind of dog do you have? And you get a bunch of replies. And if they're a potential client, you chat about dogs a few times, and then you pivot the conversation. And so, but what we've done with that is now I'm not posting to the feed, because I know the feed does not lead to one-on-one conversations. I'm not trying to create a brand new fancy video for IGTV every week, because that doesn't, help me. And I'm not spending an hour browsing Twitter every day, because it doesn't help me reach my goals.
Twitter's gone really, really negative, hasn't it?
Sorry, I don't spend a lot of time there anymore.
Twitter is not a fun place to be. It's just like a bunch of people who are, complaining about other people and what they say. That's my experience with Twitter. I mean, it may not be everyone's experience with Twitter, but that's certainly mine.
It's a platform that is evolving in some interesting directions, that's for sure.
So if you're like me, I mean, Instagram is relatively new. And I remember when Facebook bought Instagram, and I was like, oh, Instagram, what is that? And I put it on my phone, and now I use it, and I've got, I don't know, 1,000 followers or something on Instagram, but I don't know about stories. And I do watch some stories, and I see some people who use them, but I think a lot of people in my age group, I'm in my mid 50s, going to be late 50s in a couple of months. But some of these platforms seem really, difficult, like TikTok or, like Snapchat, things that I would probably, Pinterest. I mean, I know that there's a lot of women in my age who use Pinterest. I don't even have any clue about Pinterest. I've got a Pinterest account, and I'm like, what?
Yeah. Well, so let's start with Instagram stories, since that's kind of what you touched on. So Instagram stories is, for anyone who's completely unfamiliar, it's basically quick video clips or images, and you can dress them up with text and GIFs and different things like that. And they automatically expire after 24 hours. They disappear. And that's the first objection to them all the time. Like, why would I create something that's going to be gone in 24 hours? But it's important to remember that social media can be so fleeting that most of the things you put on any social media network are probably not showing up in anybody's feed after about 24 hours anyway, and maybe even less. And so that's not a reason to avoid them. The strength of Instagram stories, other than the fact that, any replies you get go right into your private messages, as we discussed, which is incredibly valuable if your value per customer or client, if every booking you get is worth $200-300 or more, or 1,000, or onward and upward, that lifetime value of a client, that's well worth having these one-on-one conversations, right? If you make 17 cents per t-shirt sale, well, then that's probably not, the way to go. But the power of Instagram stories is it's probably the fastest way to build that know, like, and trust factor that you talked about, because they're so genuine and authentic. And it's like, hey, here's me in my day. And, this is unpolished. And my favorite part about it, it started with Snapchat stories. Then Instagram basically said, hey, we're going to have something like that, but we're going to call it literally the exact same thing. But what Snapchat stories did for, I think, not just for social media, but for society altogether, is introduce this idea of expiring content. And it gave us permission, or made us comfortable enough to actually start sharing what our lives are really like. And that's why we're in this, era of authenticity that, people have always liked authentic people. But 5 years ago you had your Facebook life, picture perfect, photos of your loved ones, and, nothing's ever wrong. And look, it's a blue sky every day. And then this came along and people started sharing, a little bit more. Hey, I've got bedhead here today. Oh, sorry, I'm, not awake yet. Hey, having my coffee, these truly authentic things, but people that were not, perfectly made up all the time. And that's what stories did, is it made people real and authentic. And so that's really the strength of Instagram stories, is it gets people to lets people see what you're like, and you get to share things. And the other thing that it did too is that a lot of us have this worry that everything we say has to be super interesting. But the scary part of that is all of us have interesting things to say that we don't think are interesting. And I'm sure you've had this into your entire, career, where you're like, well, I do that all the time. That's not interesting. And somebody will say, well, tell me about this. And you're like, oh, that's a thing. When I worked as a radio host, I always assumed, if I met a listener, they would say, oh, tell me about celebrities you got to meet, or whatever it might have been. And it was always like, what color is the paint in the studio? Because I've seen it on the webcam and it looks like it's this or that, or, that kind of thing. And it's like, that's what you want to know? Or how many buttons does the control board have? How many buttons are on there? How many lights are there? Yeah. And so our jobs are more interesting than we think. And it's tough to see because we're in it every day.
Right. And I think with COVID, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how could I start doing Instagram stories? Like, my dog just walked in. I don't know if you heard her, but she can't be away from me. And so, sometimes share pictures, but it's like, how can I make my life interesting? I get up, I go for a walk, I come to the computer, I sometimes do a podcast. I suppose I could take a picture, like right now.
Yeah,
of what we're doing, and
then you can tag me in it, and then I can share it.
Put that up on social media. Yeah, so I suppose there's that. It's just a matter of just taking pictures of the mundane and the things that we find that are mundane that may not be to other people, right?
It's sharing the story of your life or of your business. For example, you might be on your walk and you say, oh, it's Friday. This is the day that I take my podcast. And today I'm going to be talking to whoever it might be. And let me know if you'd like the link, and I'm happy to share it. And then somebody says, I didn't know you had a podcast. Right. Where can I find the link? And another day you're just sharing a thought that you had. To be transparent, Instagram is not a priority for my business, but it is my favorite social network. So I post to it for fun. But, this week I shared a time management breakthrough that I had. And all these people were like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Can you send me that? And, those are points of connection. So it doesn't have to be, what you consider mundane, but sometimes that mundane stuff, is interesting. Probably the most popular Facebook Live I ever did was when my dog got scared and jumped in my lap in the middle and ripped the headphones out of my ears and knocked something over on the table. And, it was chaos, but that's real life. And that's really powerful. I
think that people do really like real life stuff, Every once in a while, I'll do a live, and I was doing a live teaching, and right in the middle of it, my dog started barking. And I was like, oh, I'm really sorry I had to kick her out. So, yeah, so that's good. So we have this understanding of what Instagram stories are. So we know that they're, these expiring things to show people kind of a little bit about your life, get them, inside of who you are. And people are interested in that. But what if you're starting with zero? If you have no followers, do you still do that? Or, what role does the advertising have to play in this?
Well, so the first thing that I strongly recommend when you are starting off is pick one social media platform and go all in on it. And a lot of times people have that fear of missing out. Like, well, if I focus on Instagram, I'm going to miss out on people on LinkedIn. But what happens is when you go deeper on one platform, you're usually going to grow faster. And the analogy I like to use is imagine that you have 3 plants in front of you, right? And you want all 3 plants to grow. And spoiler alert, the plants are your social networks. You've got 1 gallon of water and each plant needs a gallon of water. Well, what most people would do is they'd give 1/3 of a gallon to each plant. And what happens is all of the plants die or barely hang on. None of them grow and thrive. So the same analogy, now you've got your LinkedIn plant, your Instagram plant, your Facebook plant, but your limited resource is your time. So you put 1/3 of your allotted time into each one and they all just kind of sit there floundering. They certainly don't grow and thrive. And so it's really important to just pick one and go all in on it, because when you do, your content will be better because it's created for that platform. Your audience will be more loyal. You'll have more time to engage with them. And then they become these, almost brand evangelists. They'll buy more, they'll tell friends about it because you're super serving them on that platform. And there's a time to add another one later. But I think that's really the key, is to kind of start there. And then as far as growing, different platforms grow in different ways, but there's 2 primary ways to grow your audience on social media, short of sending people there from somebody else. So for you could decide, I'm going to go all in on LinkedIn. And you could, in every podcast episode, you could say, I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn, find my profile in the show notes. That would be an external way to grow. But internally in social media, there's 2 ways to grow. One is to take the time to outwardly engage. Instagram is great for this, where you basically find people that are your potential clients and customers, and you go out with and engage with them, leave them comments, things like that. Then they check you out, they hopefully will follow you. Facebook business pages, it's really hard to do that with, because a business page is only allowed to interact in certain ways.
They've really locked it down, haven't they?
Yeah, but Instagram, LinkedIn, personal profiles are great for outward engagement. Facebook personal profiles, what you can do, meeting people in groups, is incredible. Twitter, these are all places you can grow with outward engagement. And that's the, I don't have money, but I have time strategy. The other growth strategy is I have money and I don't have time, which is where you can spend money to grow your audience quickly. But that can be scary in the beginning. And I'm never going to be the person that says, oh, you got to spend money to make money. But if you're going to spend money, you should have some idea of how you're going to make it back. Because what I don't want is, what somebody came to me a couple of years ago and they said, hey, I saw your YouTube video about how to boost a Facebook post, and I boosted it for $30 and I got 200 likes and it was just the greatest thing in the world. And then the next day they sent something else, another message, and they said, well, now what?
Yeah.
And the problem is likes will not pay the bills. Likes will not pay your team or the electric bill. They don't keep the lights on. And so she decided to throw $30 out and see what happened. But if you are going to spend money, it's really important to have an understanding of, okay, well, how am I going to make this back? And if it is in the beginning and you've got some budget just to grow your audience, that's perfectly fine. But you should still have a longer term plan.
Right. But if you're going to do, I'm sorry, do you mind?
No, go ahead.
If you're going to do advertising, you want to make sure you have the proper goal. You don't want to just go out and buy likes, say, on Facebook, because you're going to get the wrong people. So you want to make sure you know type of customer you want and the person that you want to be following you. That's really important, I think, before you start spending money on advertising, that you really know who it is you're going to serve. And when we did the podcast with Colleen Kohanek, we actually showed people how to create a Facebook page. We really like to get like 100 organic followers before we even start thinking about advertising, because, at least if you have the right people and you have 100 people, then you can kind of upload that to Facebook to make a lookalike audience, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I just wanted to add on is if you have 100 people that are seeing your content, I don't mean 100 followers, because you can have 100 followers and most of them still will not see your business page posts because the free reach is so bad. But if you have 100 people that are seeing your content and nobody's buying and nobody's hiring you, spending money to reach 1,000 people or 5,000 people is not going to fix that. Like,
Right.
it's really important to, but if you have 100 people that are seeing your stuff and they're buying, odds are, if you can serve those same things, the same content to people, other similar people, then that will help your sales. And that's when it's really powerful. But sometimes people say, yeah, I've got, 500 followers and nobody's buying. I just have to get in front of more people. And, at that point, it's a problem with the product or the offer or the messaging or something along those lines. So that's why it's good to get that in line first.
There are so many factors to an online business or to any business, but, we're in this world of online right now. And again, like you said, if it was easy, everyone would do it. And, James Wedmore likes to say that, your success is inevitable if you stay with it long enough. But the other thing you have to do is as these pitfalls come up and as you make mistakes, you have to see it's you win or you learn. It's not, a failure ever. It's never a failure. I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. And what I do is I try to put systems in place to avoid those mistakes going forward. And that's really the only thing. I mean, because, we're here to kind of get an idea of what it's like to be human, right?
And that's one of the great things about social media is you can make so many mistakes and be perfectly fine. I mean, really the only thing in all of digital marketing for the most part is that you can't fix is email. Because once an email goes out, it's out. But if you make a typo in your social media post, or, you can delete posts, you can edit posts, you can do all of these things. And so it's not like, one point in time where you said, okay, I'm going to run this postcard campaign, or I'm going to buy a radio ad or something like that. And next thing you know, you're out $5,000 and it's out and you can't change it. And it's like, oh, we put the wrong phone number on the postcard. It's gone. And so social media lets us make almost as many mistakes as we, could possibly need. Yeah,
that's actually really a good thing. If you think about people like Gary Halbert, who did a lot of the, direct response mail, mail marketing, or Brian Kurtz, right? Once they sent that mailer out, if there was a mistake in it, there, just like you said, there's no getting back. Yeah. But we can do direct response social media marketing. And if we make a mistake, that's the beauty of the digital era, right? The beauty of the digital era. But, I like to say that my journey through internet marketing is kind of like my residency in surgery. When I first held a knife, the knife kind of went everywhere. And I didn't know what I was doing. And so it's, now here I am, really I'm much more focused. I know who I'm serving. I know my messaging. I know what I want to do. And, we're helping women who have, mental misery, and we're bringing them into the Minomate way of living. That's amazing, right? And through that, then we have a big ripple effect where, families are changed and relationships are healed and people are, getting better with themselves and stuff. And we have a whole series on, from minnow misery to Minomate every single month. So every month coming up, you guys will all see that. But what I've noticed is that it's just like a residency. I mean, I didn't expect to know everything about surgery when I started my surgical residency. But when I started this, I expected it to be immediately successful. And so my expectations were not in line with reality. And so how do you help people with their expectations when it comes to, starting a business or growing social media or any of those things?
I love that question. The biggest thing in the beginning is really trying to keep it simple. And first is just giving yourself grace and permission that you don't have to be all the places. And I'll tell you, when you copy what somebody more successful than you is doing, it usually fails, for a number of reasons. And I teach a course where I show people how to build their own social media marketing plan. And the reason that I created it is I saw this need where everyone else was saying, hey, here's what's worked for me, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. But because it worked for them, it may have worked for them 3 years ago. It may not work for them now or you now. Or it may have worked for them because they have a certain personality quirk, or it may have worked for them because of who they are, or it may have worked for them because they already had an audience and you don't have one. And so that's why I like to really come back and start simply and go, okay, we start off with who is your ideal customer, of course. And then we work on what is that social media goal, and then we reverse engineer the plans from there. And so the biggest thing that I work with people on going into it is really building that simple plan to start, and we can grow on it later. But just like you described with surgery, if you went in and expected to be an expert heart surgeon, brain surgeon, it's like,
Yeah.
I have a steady hand. I'm going to be great at all of this.
Without knowing anatomy first.
Yeah. But that's assuming that, okay, well, that means that I know how to use a computer or I know how to use my smartphone so I can market my business on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, all of the places. And that's when we get overwhelmed. And so that's why the simplicity is what I love to thrive on. And, understand you don't ever potentially have to be like some of these other bigger businesses that you see out there. You can literally build your entire business just on Instagram, or there are people who build their entire business just with a Facebook personal profile or with a Facebook group, or there are people that build their entire business in other people's Facebook groups. But what happens is when you keep it simple in the beginning, you get really, well, first of all, you don't get discouraged, but second is you get really good at it. And then you get better and you get better. And so there are people out there that have never set up a business page. They have a website, they're a legitimate business. And all they do is they spend time going out into other people's Facebook groups and posting and building relationships, and not posting in a spammy way. They're just out talking to people in the same way that they would at networking events.
Right.
And they've got these incredibly successful businesses like that. So the main thing, to answer your question is, let's not only keep it simple, but let's keep it simple and effective, and let's figure out what that is at the beginning so you can just, literally triple down on that. And an amazing thing happens. We started our conversation today talking about how, of course, we don't have time for social media if it's not making us any money.
Right.
But once it is, it's amazing when somebody realizes that if I spend 15 minutes a day outwardly engaging on Instagram, I find 2 new customers by the end of every week, and they're worth $1,000. All of a sudden, I've got 30 minutes a day to spend on Instagram, or 45, because now you can see where it's going. And that's what's so powerful in each one of us, in each one of our businesses. And it's just a little different for everybody. Yeah.
Well, it's almost like, when it comes to menopause, right? I tell people, when it comes to menopause, there is no one size fits all answer. And it sounds like you're doing kind of the similar thing. You've got your own unique business, you've got your own unique business DNA. And if you're just starting out, which a lot of women in my program are looking to, or people who listen to me are looking to, kind of change. They're coming into who they are, and they're thinking that, I'm not really happy in this job and I want to be happy. And maybe what I need to do to be happy is start a job or do a side hustle or something. And so I think it's important that, again, when you come to building your business, you pick one platform, just like you said, and then you really go deep in that platform. But also at the same time, make sure that you collect email addresses somewhere. Always. Because you want to make sure that you own your own marketing. You don't want to ever rely, if you build your whole business on Instagram or Facebook, at the end of the day, they may change everything about it, and you may not have access to those people anymore. Or if somebody hacks your account, there's just so many things that can happen. So you want to make sure that you are still communicating with people via email somehow.
Yeah. It's not a day one thing that I talk to people about, but they should be thinking about it on day one. There are people with hundreds of thousands of YouTube subscribers, and their account gets hacked and violates something, and they get it shut down, and they may never get it back, or it might take months of legal action if they can even afford that. You can lose your business page on Facebook, your Instagram, and it's just gone. And there's, they don't owe it to you. There's nothing you can do. That's their thing. And so, the email list is crucial.
It really is. So, we've looked at a couple of things. It's almost like, what Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind, right? You want to know what your end goal is. And the end goal is to, especially if you're a business, is to make money. If you want to make friends, then, your personal Facebook page and post things, and people will, have a conversation around that, right? If you're in it to make money, then you want to say, okay, what kind of person do I want to serve? And actually, coming up in the podcast, we're going to be talking to Ryan Levesque all about choosing your market, and how that's the most important thing you have to do to get going. So in our business series, we're bringing him on to talk about, the way to choose your market. And he wrote a whole book about that. So when you're clear on who you want to serve, and you know what the language that they use and how you want to help them, and then it's just a matter of picking one and just really keeping it simple. I'm going to tell you right now that I am so guilty of complicating everything. As somebody who's really visionary, I'm like, oh, I want to do it this way. I want to do it this way. I want to do it this way. If it's working, you can just continue to work on what's working and then, build. I think that's probably a good summary.
Yeah. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is that, I'll run into a lot of entrepreneurs. I just want it off my plate. I don't want to do it. Just can't somebody take care of it for me? I have a friend, John, who said to me a couple of years ago, I'll just give you $99 a month and can't you just do my social media for me? And I said, I'd be happy to, but here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me $99 a month and I'm not going to do anything except for tell you that it's being done, because anybody who's doing your social media for $99 a month, you're not going to get any business from it likely anyway. They'll get it off your plate. They'll post stuff, but it's not going to actually lead to you, growing your business at all. And once you get into it and figure out what's working. I was doing a coaching call yesterday with a woman who is a couples counselor, and she was struggling and she was trying to, post every other day on Facebook and all of these things. And we had this conversation and I said, what happens? Like, what do people need to know or do right before they decide to hire you? And we kind of came up with a couple of things and came up with an idea for basically a document or a lead magnet that she could put out where it was 7 things to know before you hire a couples counselor.
That's
and
great.
The hope is that once she's got this, it may not be about posting every other day or every day anymore. It might be that she puts it up and she spends money to get it in front of people if she has a system to where people download it, they get a follow-up email, they do a free consultation call, and next thing you know, they're a client. And now you don't have to do all of those things. You just have to figure out what's works. And that was based on another client I had who was a child sleep consultant. And, it was interesting working with her because as a parent of young boys, I remember the sleepless nights.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, if you came into my life at the right time and you were like, yeah, it's great, I'll get your baby to sleep, it's $10,000. I would be like, how much room do we have on the credit card? Like, please, if you can get him to sleep tonight. And it was a similar thing where she put together this guide and it was 7 ways to get your child sleeping better by this weekend or something like that. And once she put it out there, she spent $30 to get it in front of parents of young kids. And the next day, she had booked $1,400 in new business from this $30 spend. And so that's how simple it can be, but it does take some work to get there. The main thing I wanted to say was if you understand it yourself, instead of just going, somebody just do this for me, you can outsource it later. Mm-hmm. You can outsource it for cheap because you give it to somebody that's already on your team or that you trust because they're just enacting what you already know, instead of the woman I saw a month ago who had admitted she spent $20,000 on a Facebook ads expert last year and got nothing from it. And that's why like helping people learn it themselves, because it's so it's cheaper in the long run, but nobody knows your business like you do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's ever going to care about your business as much as you do. And that's a lesson that I learned pretty early on, from the surgical practice all the way through to this practice where we help women kind of redefine menopause and this time of their life, and so, I mean, I am probably your struggling avatar because I find social media to be daunting. I don't want to do it. I used to go do Facebook Lives all the time and I was like, this sucks. And I started doing podcasts instead because I like podcasting, but there was a time there where I think I went live every single day for like 8 months so I could get good. I was like, I'm going to just go live every day at 8 a.m. And I got a following, I did, but it helped me kind of define like how I wanted to talk to people and what I'm about and things like that. And I guess the point I'm trying to make, it's a process, it's life, and don't expect that you're going to go out there and put your stuff out there and somebody's going to buy it unless you really, really know, what your audience needs and what they're struggling with. And, you really want to be inside their heads, and that takes time. You got to get to know them.
Yeah. And your podcast is not technically social media. It's obviously media.
Yeah.
But if you found that your podcast drives people to your email list or whatever else, then your social media goal might just be to get new listeners on the podcast or even get your current listeners to consume more episodes if you know that helps. But, the hardest thing is there are so many pieces and I'm a shiny object chaser. I'm as bad as anybody. And I'm like, similar to what you said earlier, where it's like, I've got so many ideas and so many things that I want to do. And so, picking and choosing is the tough part for me. But once you figure out what works, then you can focus on that. And the great thing is once it's working, and if it doesn't take up all of your time, then you can try one of the other ones, And I love that you found podcasting and that you love it.
Do you processize things? Do you show people how to turn once they start to find success, do you show them how they can turn it over to somebody else? Somebody like me who's got a ton of video content, right? how to turn that over so that they can kind of get away from having to do, all the things.
I have a thing I teach that's essentially how to outsource your social media once you understand it. And it's kind of around, can I trust them? How do I share passwords? How do I communicate with them and things like that? And we go a little bit into the hardest part is, you as Dr. Gordon, you're a personal brand ultimately, right?
Yeah.
And the hardest part is for most people is how do I turn over a personal brand? They're not me.
Right.
But there are ways you can do it. I've met lots of people over the years to where, and again, they figure out a system that works. And you're not going to be able to hire somebody for minimum wage to do this, but you also don't have to hire somebody at the top. But you get somebody that's a content creator, and maybe all you do is when you have a thought, you record a voice memo and you send it to them, and then they turn it into posts and all of these different things. And of course, like you said, you have all these videos. Somebody could turn those into content. Like if you have a bunch of hour-long videos, they could turn those into 60-second clips for Instagram videos or different things like that. So I mean, it can be done. It's just at different levels for different people. And the personal brand is the hardest because you're not them and they're not you, but it's doable.
Right. I think we've done a really good job of kind of hitting the basics here. Was there anything else that, you would tell to somebody who was starting out that how to be, successful from the get-go?
This is a really good thing to remember for people that are starting out or people that are restarting or people that are struggling in it, right now as well and it's really important that you become, social media has this tendency to feel like a 24/7 hustle. We have this amazing piece of technology in our pockets, in our purses all the time, and it dings. And sometimes we get that dopamine hit, and then other times it's, gosh, there it is again. Oh, I got to reply to this person. I got to do that. And so it's really important that you don't let it control you. And this is for your own health and sanity. And this is a lesson that I learned the hard way. My wife used to work evenings. And so from starting when I had how old was he? I think 8 months and a 4-year-old. It was just me and the kids every night. And so I had to, the pickups from daycare and dinner and the bedtime routine and, all of that. And she would get home just in time to read to them before bed. And there was one night we were sitting at the table and my 4-year-old at the time was telling this epic tale about something that happened on the playground that day. And for anybody that has kids, that you have to interview your kids to get anything out of them. And so he was actually telling a story and my phone dinged and I told myself, I'm going to look over and see what it is and keep listening. But the moment I looked over, I stopped listening. And I didn't used to talk about this story because essentially embarrassed by it. But I looked over and it was something from a client. I was working at an agency at the time. And I said to my boys, I said, hang on, guys, I got to go take care of this really quick. I'll be right back. And so I got up, I went into the office. I took care of this, client issue. I came back 10 minutes later. Both the kids were gone and the dog was on the table eating my dinner. It was this moment of, what am I doing? And my boss at the time was like, oh, our clients love how responsive you are and all this kind of stuff. And so it was that moment where I realized I have to set boundaries. And it's really important that you do it in your business and on your social media. And we tell ourselves, everyone needs a quick response. And if your business hours are 9 to 5, great. If you want to do that and provide that for them, that's fine. But if you set boundaries, you will actually earn the respect of your people even more. And if you let them roll over you, then they'll expect that, that 24/7 response. And so it's part of not getting overwhelmed in the beginning, but just decide, hey, after 6 o'clock, I'm not replying to anything till the next morning. Because guess what? There are few to zero emergencies in most of our businesses.
That's
Surgeon
true.
aside, Dr. Gordon.
No, I'll tell you that was the reason why, one of the main reasons is there are no emergencies in an online business that are life and death. I mean, there may be personalities and personnel and, HR and stuff like that, but none of that is life threatening. I mean, having done trauma and plenty of life-saving operations, at the end of the day, I don't have to get up in the middle of the night anymore. And that's That was the impetus for this. So
yeah, just because we're always connected doesn't mean that you have to be. And then the last thing too is that, if you're telling yourself I don't have time to keep up, it's really important to separate your social media work time from your social media playtime.
yeah.
And so I've worked with a lot of business owners where they say, yeah, and then I browse Twitter, and it turns out they're spending an hour a day browsing Twitter. And it's like, well, when's the last time that somebody came to you and hired you from Twitter? I think I got somebody about 6 months ago, maybe somebody a couple years before that. It's like, okay, keep tweeting, but that's Netflix time. That's not work time anymore. And so that's the other boundary that I think is really important to set.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know that not everybody needs a reply right away, and we don't have to be. We're not bots. I mean, that's why we have bots. We set up bots so that they'll answer right away. I don't even allow mini notifications on my phone because I just find them so distracting.
Yeah.
So
yeah, my ego was kind of hit. What I did was after that, I turned off all these notifications on my phone, so I didn't see them until I logged in. And then 2 weeks later, the world hadn't melted down, and it was like, oh, I'm not as important as I thought I was.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So where can people find you?
My website is a great place to start for anybody. It's just 5minutesocialmedia.com. 5 is spelled out F-I-V-E. And then if you want to, if you hear this, you want to ask me any follow-up questions, I love answering on Instagram because I can answer with a voice recording. I'm on Instagram at Mr. Jerry Potter, MrJerryPotter. Jerry Potter rhymes with the boy wizard, as I like to say.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on to the Menopause Movement podcast. I hope that our listeners have learned quite a bit about social media.
My pleasure, Dr. Gordon. Thank you for having me.
Now, if you have questions about the topics covered in this or any other podcast, I invite you to open a conversation with me via email at info@menopausemovement.com or on Facebook Messenger through my Facebook page at Dr. Michelle Gordon. That's DrMichellEllelGordon. I also want to invite you to join in our next beta group. Here at the Menopause Movement, we are always trying out new methods of teaching and the best ways to get on top of your menopause symptoms. We regularly run beta test groups where we create a learning experience valued at $2,000, but at no cost to you in exchange for feedback and testimonials. To get notified of our next beta group, simply sign up at beta.menopausemovement.com. And thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement. I appreciate you.